My name is Fischer. I'm an artist originally from the Midwest. A lot of my work is set in the landscape. I now live in Salt Lake Valley, where I am wrapping up a one-year contract at Utah Valley University. And then who knows what's next. So it's very exciting to be here, and I look forward to speaking with you all afterwards at the parlor tonight. So at the beginning of our time this week, I think it was Doug asked, or maybe Harmony, said something about what is the center of screen dance? And I find that question really fascinating. And I think it's a way of orienting ourselves in the field, and I propose that maybe not a center, maybe not a place or a group, but perhaps practice at the center. And for me, practice would be making, writing, curating, and teaching. And so today I'm going to be talking about a particular practice that I engaged in. It feels like it took up most of my adult life, even though it was only 2 years. And this practice is, I'm going to call it Hold, is the project. For me, I really was like following a set of values and following a set of really important elements to the process with an end way that I wanted an audience to interact with my work in mind. So a lot of it is process-based, a lot of it is trying to resist outcome-based, productivity-based ways of working, but I also had a very, very clear picture of how I wanted someone to interact with the work at the end of the day. I will also mention that Hold, the work, was part of my graduate work. So the written document, I do a written document, I wrote it so that you could read it in any order. So if it feels like I'm jumping around a bit, it's because I wrote it so you could like read chapter 7 and then read chapter 4 in a bit of a choose your own adventure way. So I have my notes, and I'll try not to improvise too much because then the timer will go off and we'll be out of time. So I do want to just thank, before I begin, I had 3 committee members who were extremely influential and supportive, as well as our dear Katrina McPherson as my very, very important mentor, but Cadence Whittier, who is no longer on this earth, was an important mentor for me, as well as Brent Schneider, who is still with us, and Satu Humasti. So, somebody knows Brent? Yes, Brent was on my thesis committee. So thanks to all of them. I could not have gotten through that process without them. So throughout this process of creating Hold, this picture you see on the screen, this is kind of a proof of concept that I went through at the Atlantic Center for the Arts, where if you have the chance to go there in New Smyrna, Florida, I highly recommend it. I had 3 weeks to just make work and was able to engage in a process and identify the things that were really important for me as I created this body of work that ended up being 7 large-scale screens installed simultaneously in a warehouse space, which premiered on December 1st in 2020, which was what we thought at the time the height of the pandemic. And of course, time marched on and things became more dire, but at that time, I do think that context is important, and we'll get to more of that. So here's some words I've wrapped around this process. Through this process of like creating and writing, the elements of improvisation and scoring increased in prominence for me in this process. They are now mostly formed in articulate ideas, and for me, the main driving factors were improvisation, scoring, and screen dance is working from a place of the female gaze, empathy, and agency. And so all of this kind of gets braided together. And I think it's really essential to think about, but to interrogate the process of looking through the camera. Gaze theory is all around us, we're swimming in it right now. But interrogate that and engage with new ways of holding, I can't move forward too far away, holding something that is recording and really looking at how is my body behaving? What am I doing with my 3-dimensional body as it is recording something that will be edited at some point while I'm in an actual space with other 3-dimensional bodies who are complete and whole human beings. Improvisation for me is really essential as a non-doing practice, and so here I'm drawing on the work of Jenny Odell, I don't know if anyone has read her work. I know, yeah, Claire, you have. And I have a quote from her that's really important to me. And for me, the book, so I highly recommend How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell. And she proposes a conceptualization of time that focuses less on productivity and sensing, feeling, processing. And this is not for the purpose of becoming later more productive. It's not some kind of life hack where, oh, I'm gonna think and feel and then I can be super efficient. This is kind of what she writes is, this close attention practice can help us see into the nuanced ecologies of being and identity. And this kind of understanding has a few important requirements. First, it asks us to loosen our grip on the idea of discrete entities, simple origin stories, and neat A-B causalities. It requires humility and openness because to seek context is to already acknowledge that you don't have the whole story. And so for me, this is really important in working with a performer in a shoot space. And it also extended to like move away from causality, move away from here's the footage, I'm gonna edit it in a particular way and make it something. What happens when I have hundreds of hours of footage, maybe not hundreds, but a lot of footage, and I'm now with it, how do I be with that footage and still honor the process of the people who are on screen without jumping to the end? But I also have an end in mind, right? I'm not giving up the end. And I'm like, it's gonna be installed in this large space. It's really important to me. So thinking about, okay, nuanced ecology, female gaze, how can I empower performers? Actually, maybe performers are already empowered. I just need to get out of the way of them having power over their own bodies. So all that's in there for me. And I wrote a manifesto. And this manifesto is specifically on attention and non-doing. So it's not particularly on holding the camera or editing anything. But this, I took out the more dramatic parts. So if you want, I can tell you them later. But for the purpose of the recording, I took some of the drama out. But here's my manifesto on attention and undoing. And for me, this is mostly for me, yeah, I'll just read it. Yes to co-creating camera, no to a consuming camera. Yes to parameters, containers, and frames. Yes to pushing on parameters, containers, and frames. Yes to leaving them. Notice the tune of your body. Track your inner dialogue, both verbal and nonverbal. Yes to doing nothing. Yes to noticing. Yes to a self-reflexive process. No to judging the process. Yes to not knowing. Not knowing is the antithesis to control. Yes to choices. Yes to waiting. Subtlety and complexity support one another. Embrace immediacy. So there's kind of a non-doing, but also I'm like trying to make work. So I'm not just gonna not do anything for the process. So I was really grappling with how to engage with my collaborators, how to, through this kind of non-doing, is like, can I like push back on productive culture? Can I push back on perfection culture? Can I push back on capitalism and power structures through my Hannah Fischer process in Salt Lake City, right? And so really trying to move away from like transactional ideas of relationship and more through co-creation in a space. And so for me, this really translates, I'm like running out of time very quickly, translates into creating parameters for making the work. And so there's a lot of manifestos, there's a lot of scores. I'm just gonna change the image because I can. It might just take me a moment to find it because this is so tiny. I can't, is this it? Yeah, there it is. Okay, so this is us on set. So basically I'm grappling with these ideas. They're very kind of floating in a cloud around me. I'm kind of swimming through them, and we can talk more about them. I'm going to get to the nuts and bolts, and I'll refer back as we go. This is us on set, and where I landed was I'm going to cultivate 6 duets, or facilitate 6 duets, so 12 dancers, and just ask 2 people who are in one another's COVID bubble. So we have Rebecca Speechley and Ali Lorenz, who are roommates, And then my collaborator, Erin Lynn, who worked as my boom operator for most of my processes. And as I invited them into the process, I just said, I'm interested in working in a way that you have as much say as I do over what we're doing. I'm driving this content-wise. I'm interested in the physicality of closeness, distance, and intimacy. This is something that developed before the pandemic, but became very poignant for me in a time where I had no one in my personal bubble except my partner for, almost a year. And they, 12 people agreed to do this miraculously. I created these scores, movement scores, which were based on space and shaping the space between two people. And these were created very specifically in mind so that the dancers could engage with them in many ways. You can come into it through a very body action sort of way, through a very kind of space theory sort of way, kind of a shaping situation. And I was able to do this with, again, 6 duets. And the location kind of served as a camera score for me. And I know we talked a bit about prime lenses, and that's also what I used. And so what became really exciting for me, being okay, how can I be embodied behind the camera? What does it mean for me to be in this shared space where we're all improvising? Everyone is improvising. Erin and I became very good at improvising the sound and the camera together. We had our own little duet. And be in this space together as the dancers are having their own experience. May or may not be involved with me. Set a 5-minute timer to give us some kind of container. At the end of those 5 minutes of moving or whatever happens, camera and sound are rolling, we cut, and then I just ask the dancers, what happened? Can you track your attention? What do you remember? And so when we get to the final kind of version of this, I'll share some of the archival footage. Some of that sound was included. So generally I was only including sync sound in the edit, but listening to the voices of the dancers for me is really important in an editing process, because there is this trend of silent performers. And I do like to hear the voice of the performers. You can hear my voice sometimes off camera, but so this kind of importance of, if I wanted to become closer to them, I had to move closer to them. I didn't push. And so really this 3-dimensional shaping of the space. Here we are working in an interior space, but we worked in many exterior spaces as well. So I took Katrina's words in her book to heart, and I took well more than 2 weeks off after I would film something. Sometimes I took 6 weeks off and would get back into the edit. And I'm looking at this footage, 6 sets of shoots. I need to organize it in some way. Everyone kind of dealt with the same movement scores, which again are looking at closeness, intimacy, how can we be together? You'll see some of the frames, a lot of it, people are just kind of clutching one another in and around the frame. I'm like, what do I do with this footage? Why did I film so much? And, how am I going to decide what's not in? So I also wanted to honor the performers. I would, spend a lot of time with footage. I felt like I spent time with these people when you sit in the room. So I started to kind of devise a set of editing scores based on what was happening in the frame. So this particular shoot is interior, so I couldn't really get particularly far from the performers. And so I ended up editing all of the footage. It's still choreographic in the sense of timing and pacing, montage approach, but I was like, the dancers need to take up 60% of the frame. And this wasn't terribly hard because we were in a living room together. But it was so easy to begin to suss out, okay, they're spending a lot of time in close proximity. I'm really close. We're maybe 8 feet apart at most with this, fixed lens. How can I begin to choreograph the footage if I'm only using shots where they're taking up 60% of the frame? And I wrote down a few of my other scores as a way of each scene kind of got its own unique approach. And this was, for me, a really fun way to sit with the footage and see what it is first before I made any decisions. Knowing, again, there's an endpoint. I do want people to encounter it in a certain way, but I'm like, I don't want to rush through this. I can be very, very, very outcome oriented. So this kind of work is important for me as a person to engage in as well. So another couple of scores that I worked in editing specifically is only a few frames at a time can be removed. Like what if they're kind of like long clips? I'm working with one, you'll see the dancers are always leaving the frame. They're always, in every shot, someone's always leaving the frame. What if are there any scenes where a one take feels appropriate, where I can just like screen 5 minutes? And there was one that I felt really, really positive about our triangulation between the performers and I. And so it's like, I'm not going to make any edits. It is what it is. Repeat the sequence in loose frames, a la Katrina McPherson. Kind of working with, okay, where's the light in the frame? How can I choreograph the light source? Also, I only want to see them alone or together. So I'm kind of making a rhythm, like an ABC, very formal in some ways, approach to alone together, or maybe absent as well from the frame. So I have 4 minutes. I'm going to show you a couple of stills and maybe say a few more things. I've gotten through the majority of my notes. This is me. I was in front of the camera in the proof of concept. It became just kind of logistically impossible for me to, not impossible, it became an easeful decision for me to decide to stay behind the camera. If there are future iterations, I would love to increase who's holding the camera, and even like, if you would like to edit something, that would be phenomenal. There's a lot of things for future iterations of this, but this is my friend Gabe Cortez, who's a wonderful painter in Miami. This is from one of the Alone or Together editing scores. This is Tori Meyer, who's his dancer in Salt Lake City. This is, I would say, like one of my images that where I was like, okay, I think the work is going somewhere. I think there's a sensibility and a feeling tone that is coming to the front, which is this kind of clutching or leaving. Same duet from the living room. And again, now in the landscape, in the foothills of Salt Lake City. This is Corinne Lawner and Rachel Andes. Who's who? And then maybe just a couple of moments to look at the archival footage. Okay. We'll see if it plays. Is this one? Yeah, this one. Okay, we'll leave it low.
Oh, that's really high.
Oh, it's really high? Okay, okay. Yeah. Go on. Okay, great. So we'll just watch this. I can make it this way.
Is there sound here?
There's no sound. It's okay.
Yeah?
Well, I don't know what to do about it if there's no sound, but I'll just let it keep playing. But so the final score now is what you're experiencing. And that is something that emerged in the process, was like, oh, maybe because the screens are simultaneous, I can ask the audience to engage in a score. And I didn't tell them I was asking them this. I just arranged the screens in a way where you could really only see one, maybe two at a time. And so if they wanted to see more, the movement was like necessary through the space. And again, this is December 1st, 2020. So very small amounts of people were allowed into the space at one time. So it wasn't difficult to keep 6 feet from one another. Oh no, come on, internet. There is some split screen that also was a way of scoring for me, looking at two things existing at once. Sometimes it abstracted the body in a way that I wasn't super thrilled with, but I'll pause just for a moment. Yeah, I'm sorry you can't hear the sound. It's all sync sound with a little bit of audio talking over top of it. And so I felt very, I don't know, fulfilled might be the wrong word, to get to the installation process where I was like, knew I wanted large screens. I didn't know if they were going to be on a track. I didn't know, I knew they were not meant to be screened at the same, screened one at a time. I really wanted them to exist together in the space, almost like bodies, like 7 bodies of screens. But it has decided to start over. Come on, Wi-Fi. This was my favorite angle. This is like kind of long corridor. And so that I was essentially asking the audience to negotiate a three-dimensional space in similar ways that I was asking the dancers to negotiate, like shaping the space, making choices about moving closer or farther apart, opening and closing space within oneself, or between a screen and oneself, and then, you know, because of COVID, between you know, other people in the space as well. So I feel that part of the power of this piece was seeing the closeness at a time where we were quite far apart. And this is something that happened I didn't have any control over. But it became more and more important to me over time to be able to see people in this tight proximity. I'm gonna go ahead and stop talking and take questions or comments. I'm happy to speak more about agency, female gaze, and body camera, any of these things, or any practicalities. I'll let this play. 20 minutes really does fly by, doesn't it? Yes?
I'm wondering how you're conceptualizing the female gaze, right? I've heard so many different definitions of the female gaze over the years, especially again as a film professor.
Sure.
Gaze theory a lot. Yeah, what's yours?
Sure, yeah. So for the Zoom audience, the question is, how do I conceive of the female gaze, or my conceptualization of the female gaze? I think, so again, Katrina McPherson has extended this into, well, let me rewind. I look at Joey Soloway when I think about the female gaze, and that's kind of my framework for it. And so looking at, I see you seeing me, the felt sense of the camera to me is the female gaze. And McPherson, who's in the room, extended that into the embodied camera and the empowered performer. And for me, what that means is, I think you can work with a shot list or without a shot list, but it really is looking through the lens. Maybe it's like this dual attention, or I'm looking through the lens, but I'm also looking at a whole and complete person who may want to have say about what's happening. And it's my responsibility as the person with a historic sense of power in this relationship, the person with the camera, historically has held the power, capital P power, to cultivate and ask the questions that create space for someone else to make choices. So sometimes I think that means, where do you want to start this scene? Sometimes that means, I was hoping we could film in this kind of a location. These are my ideas. Is this work for you? I mean, I think the reason a lot of mainstream filmmakers do not work in this way is because it actually does create a lot more questions and a lot more dialogue. And when you're working on time is money, people don't want to do that. I do think it actually makes for a much better process, personally. It's a process that gives me what I want out of the field, which is a sense of deep connection with the people I'm working with. But I think in terms of, there's also a way of editing that can be, I hesitate to use this word, an intuitive gaze. I think it's too vague, I need a new word. But a way of seeing the footage all the way through and not making a note. I mean, this requires time, which we often don't have a lot of. But seeing the footage, not making a note, not making a determination on what is good or beautiful on the first round, but seeing what is there first. That's how I conceptualize it. I think it can be further conceptualized. I think it could be more clarified, but in its basic sense, it's the camera that's not there to consume. I don't like the word capture. I don't like the word shoot. I think we need different language. Thank you for your thoughtful question. I think I might have time for one more, if there's anything from the Zoom.
When people are done asking questions, I have an observation that I'll finish with.
I would love that.
Yeah.
I can't see if anyone's in the dark moving at all, so you have to really flap your wings. No, it's okay. I don't think anyone is moving, I just...
Could you maybe talk a little bit about the language
record. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, thank you. The question was, what kind of language do you like in lieu of capture and shoot? Record. Film isn't really the right word since it's all digital, but I think for me, usually I use the word record. Or some of the older language like rolling, cut, those things are useful for me on set. But, working from a place of not wanting to abdicate responsibility as the director and the driving force, but also wanting to include, I think, usually I'm like, are we ready to begin? Just much more colloquial language. Yeah, Katrina. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add in, I know you want to say something as well.
Well,
But just as a, because obviously it's so interesting now where you'll take this.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered whether I've been reading recently Elsa Lebo, and she talks about a documentary maker called Jennifer Fox, who worked with this process of what she called passing the camera in a documentary, kind of ethnographic documentary way. And I wondered whether that had actually looking back at this project, had that been part of your process? I mean, did your performers use the camera at all, even if you didn't then record any of that? But was that part of your process, or could that be part of your process?
Sure, I'll just repeat it for our online viewers. Katrina was asking me if the performers used the camera, held the camera, and if that might be part of the process in the future. I think it was not part of this particular process, but I do think it belongs in future iterations. And I will also say that it is clear in the archival footage that the vast majority of my performers are very young, white, highly dance-trained people. And that's also something that if there were to be a future iteration, that's like, okay, that it is what it was at that time. And I have various feelings about it. And also I think a responsibility to, in the future, to consider that more carefully, even if it takes more time to get the performers. And again, there are other constraints that impact that. But I think, again, for me, a lot of it comes back to time and to cultivate a practice that allows for a lot of time for things to develop and to not just work with the people who are available, who I am extremely grateful that they worked with me, but when we're thinking about representation at all stages of the production process, the people who are around me look like me. so it's gonna take more time and more intention to change that. But yeah, I would love to pass the camera around more. I think it's such a fun process. Doug, I'll pass it to you so we can possibly stay on track.
Thanks. Yeah.
No.